Listen, I know we normally talk about books, but hear me out for a sec. Back in 2018, video game person Yuji Naka founded Balan Company as a subsidiary of Square Enix. Naka was foundational in creating both Sonic the Hedgehog and Nights into Dreams, which are two video game franchises that coincidentally both give me headaches to look at. Balan Company and its flagship game, Balan Wonderworld, was Naka's one chance to create a mascot-focused 3D platformer for the modern age. As far as I can tell, he legitimately believed that this game would be great, even Japan's answer to American gaming juggernaut Gwimbly. Not that anyone else was convinced, but it's nice that he thought that. From there, it didn't take long for production to balloon out of control. To appeal to as wide an audience as possible, they over-engineered everything but the gameplay, leaving that as simple as possible. It had a crisp, zany art style, a million too many cutesy creatures, and famously, it bound every single button to the same action.
Yeah, I think that's so stupid that there are 4 buttons that all select the language.
Every single face button on the entire controller does the exact same thing.
I would say that that's bad design.
It becomes obvious very quickly that this is going to suck. COVID hit, Naka gets cold feet, and apparently he was just a horrible boss, so they fired him and then released the game anyways in 2021. Balan Wonderworld hits the shelves, receives universal hate, and then Naka gets arrested for insider trading. The end. I probably missed something here. I'm not really a video game person, and I was never a Sonic the Hedgehog person. I'm sure there's someone else out there with a better video about the actual controversy and the development of the game. The reason I'm telling you guys all this stuff, though, is to lay a precedent for why this game has triggered my dark fascination with failure that started the SBU project. This whole thing feels very much like an English Club podcast book, right? You have the hubris, the talent, the delusion, the drama, the vision, and then ultimately it all falls apart. Yuji Naka is, depending on how you look at it, the victim and/or the villain of the story. And years later, I'm still thinking about Balan Wonderworld, but I've never been able to talk about it much because this is a channel that's primarily about books. Lo and behold, though, there is a tie-in novel out there, and it's in conversation with its source material in a way that I actually think is pretty interesting and extremely, extremely infuriating. You're going to see 2 refrains about this book online. If you're like me and you were interested in the Balan Wonderworld disaster when it first happened, you might have adopted these beliefs for yourself. The first thing you'll hear is that this book fills in plot holes that the game left open, and the second thing that you're going to hear is that this book is good. Both of which I have very strong opinions about to the negative. Honestly, I think this is going to be less of an analysis of the book as much as a proxy war against Redditors and children on Amazon reviews, but I'm still hoping it'll be fun. We'll see. Part 1. Does Balan Wonderworld, Maestro of Mystery, Theater of Wonders add anything to the experience of the game? No. And I realize that's an extremely variable and subjective statement, so let's do an experiment really quick. I'll show you an isolated sequence from the game, then give you information that was only available in the novel, this information that explains everything about the Balan Wonderworld lore, and you tell me if it actually helps. So be honest. Does it change your experience, offer you anything at all, to learn that this guy's name is Bartholomew? Let's try for a bit to run through the book and the game in parallel as much as possible. This is not a podcast episode. I'll give you the basics and we'll get into detail as we need to. This is probably going to get messy, but honestly, there's not a lot of detail to begin with, so I'm not worried about it. The book follows the story of Leo Craig, who will end up being referred to as Street Beat for reasons we'll get into. In the game, you can choose between him and Emma Cole, who's also called Fighter for most of the book. This is our first big digression between the game and the book. Book Fighter spends all of her time off screen, whereas you can go through all the events of Balan Wonderworld as Fighter herself in the game. Even though the game's events do seem very tailored to Street Beat's character arc. I mean, Leo's whole personality is his love of dance, whereas Emma doesn't have any connection to dance at all, so it's obvious even in the game who the canon main character is. The book is actually so anti-Emma Cole that the opening chapter is just the opening cutscene if you pick the boy character. Out on the street, the dancers worked through their routine, perfectly in sync thanks to their long days of practice. Every move met with cheers from the gallery. Past the spectacle went a young boy. "Hey, Leo," called one of the performers, "come dance with us." It wasn't the first time the dancers had tried, and failed, to get the boy to join in. He ignored this invitation as he had ignored all the rest, and walked by the dancers without so much as a glance. For a street troupe, the dancers were surprisingly good, but to the boy, they were no better than amateurs. He kept his eyes downcast and walked. The boy's gaze shot up to an alley he had passed and ignored hundreds of times. Something about it called to him. He turned down the alley. After a couple steps, he saw some sort of light up ahead. Surprise stopped him in his tracks. The alley led to a strange building he had never seen before. It was a theater, and a huge one too. Yet he hadn't heard anything about its construction. The doors closed slowly behind him, and the boy vanished from the world. The Balan Theater is sort of this extra-dimensional prison that people go to when they need character development. The easiest pull I can come up with for this would be like Infinity Train, but in the case of the Balan Theater, everyone goes at some time in their life. Even you. So I guess it's more like purgatory. Either way, in the book, Leo forgets his own name and starts calling himself Street Beat, given a stage of his own to dance in forever. There is no analog to this in the game. In the game, you're taken to the Isle of Tims, this hub level where you play with these tiny, adorable bird rabbit things. So, to be fair, Tims are in the book. We're eventually going to learn that the crystals you collect throughout the game are condensed emotions and they eat them to grow their power, and that the Tims are specifically related to the Nagati, which are the game's primary enemies, but who cares? These aren't burning questions that ruin the game. This is just like lore. If you're like me and you care more about what the Isle of Tims is, what the Tower of Tims is, and why you need to repair it, you can stay wondering that forever because the game will never tell you. There is no mention of the place you spend most of your time in, the place that you have to spend most of your time in because you have to wait for the Tims counter to go up, which takes physical, actual, real-life time. You don't even see the train that unlocks new levels that I thought was kind of neat. These funny dancing guys and any indication that these people are real creatures in some dimension have no corollary in the book. Instead, the vital information that we get is proper nouns and crap already established through visual storytelling. In the game, you go from stage to stage doing 2 acts, 1 boss fight, and then a ridiculous dance number. There's some post-game stuff, but it's not relevant to our discussion. In the book, Street Beat essentially does this 3 times over, just with nauseating amounts of stupid dialogue. This brings us to the bulk of Act 1. Street Beat's been seeing a weird man and a child running around. He meets Clock Tower Kid, who has also been seeing weird stuff. And then they go to her stage and talk about seeing a weird man and a child. Then they team up and talk to Pensive Pierrot on his stage, who's also been seeing a weird man and a child. And then they talk about how they've seen the weird man and the child. Then they go to Scarecrow, Bugsy, Watcher of the Woods, Sentinel of the City, Skygazer, Seagazer, Madam of the Mansion, Checkered King, Invisible Custodian, and then Lady of the Midnight Sun. And they have the exact same conversation. The 3 of us have been seeing these odd visions. Scarecrow's eyes shot up from his own coffee. From his expression, Streetbeat could tell he had seen something too. You mean you've seen the grinning man in the top hat and the girl called Fighter? Pensive, you saw someone just now, didn't you? So, you've seen them too, Streetbeat nodded. Not too long ago, I had this vision of a grinning man in a top hat and a girl. That's them. Was it your first vision? This was my second, but it wasn't just the man in the top hat and the girl. You just saw something, didn't you? A vision. Skygazer paused. So, you've seen them too, then. Unease clouded Skygazer's expression. Streetbeat continued. You saw Fighter and the grinning man in the top hat, right? I thought I was the only one having these visions. Kinda nice to know I'm not. Something is happening to Wonderworld. Streetbeat and the others brought Madam of the Mansion up to speed. The blood drained from her face. I've seen Fighter and that awful grinning man too. Pensive Pierrot let out a sigh. Something is definitely happening to Wonderworld. Am I done? Do you get the idea? This happens every single time. It's so annoying. Occasionally, Lance will teleport in and tell our characters not to worry about anything. There's this weird thing that happens where everyone knows each other's nickname on Wonderworld just by looking at them, which I'm positive they did just so we didn't have to have 12 different name learning, name exchanging scenes. You know what I mean? I hope just from this very high level explanation that you can see the book ruining structural issues. The dream world slowly decaying thing could be enough to sustain Act 1 in a normal situation, but not if you do it the exact same way 12 different times with 12 different characters who become progressively more annoying and wooden as time moves on. For now, though, I just want to ignore the qualitative stuff and focus on the information that this book gives us, which the game does not, which is nothing. Let's say their personality, for instance. For each of these people, just by glancing at their design, at worst watching their opening boss cutscene, you get as much of an idea of their character as you'll get from so many pages of noise. This guy's a kindly hayseed. This girl has a weird hang-up about cats. This lady is a loud but kind person with a taste for the finer things. And this girl likes bugs. It's not rocket science or anything that we need an entire act of repetitive scenes to establish. If anything, it's a testament to the character design that this is so easy. But hey, you know, it's just Act 1. Maybe they had to do this to retread on information just for the people who are insane enough to buy a light novel based off of a video game that they don't know anything about. Which leads us to Act 2. So at the bottom of Act 1, after we had our 12 redundant scenes of meeting our 12 redundant characters, Lance shows up. Lance has appeared before. I haven't really gone into it yet. He is the bad guy. He's the person who's trying to keep them in Wonderworld. He's passing himself off as the maestro in the book. So he just appears and he's like, hey, 12 people, the creepy guy that you've been seeing is called Balan, and he's trying to take over Wonderworld. So you can defend it by remembering your traumatic backstory. As Act 2 rolls around, they all unanimously agree to this, creating the bosses of each stage in the game. So let's go back to our friend Bartholomew for a second and see what the game says about his transformation.
Whoa.
Wow, see? It's evil.
And now I have to fight that.
Yeah, you have to fight him. You'll see. Oh my god, Jose, no! Jose, no, don't give in to darkness!
He gave it-
Lance! It's Lance!
No.
Look, it's Lance!
Is Lance the antagonist?
Lance! It's Lance! Don't you know Lance? From the plot of the game that was explained to you?
God, he turned him into what he hated most.
So the book's explanation of how the boss monsters came to be is just a retcon. In the book, Lance appears before everyone and tells them this lie about Balan being the bad guy, and then they give in to their negative emotions to defend Wonderworld. Hearing that doesn't address any plot holes. It doesn't recontextualize my understanding of the game's story. It contradicts it. And it's not better, it's just different. Honestly, though, the game's version of events is way more straightforward. It's a devil on the shoulder type deal. Not some creepy guy took me here in this magical world where I can process my trauma, and then a different creepy guy wiped my memories in an attempt to keep me safe, but then that other creepy guy convinced me that the first creepy guy is actually trying to take over my favorite pocket dimension, and that makes me mad. And while we're digressing, let's talk more about Lance real quick. Yes, obviously it is weird that he shows up in the game without explanation, but come on. Good wannabe Tumblr sexy man, bad wannabe Tumblr sexy man. This isn't complicated. Is the fact that Lance used to be Balan 3,000 years ago really that important to your understanding of the game? Act 3 is where things start to realign with the game. Streetbeat realizes that he hasn't transformed like the rest of them, and then Streetbeat and Balan go off to dully experience the plot of the game. Literally, he'll go to a stage, encounter some Nagati, wear a handful of costumes from the game, and then fight the boss. The only thing that's not just what happens in the game is occasionally Balan will show up just to recite some joylessly mean rhyme. Me oh my, asking questions you certainly do adore, especially all the ones I've answered before. Balan gave an exasperated snort. This one's funny. Why, little one, you seem quite upset, said Balan, glancing sidelong at Leo as they walked. Is your inability to convince the others to help you fight Lance making you fret? Are you sad because you have no friends, kid? Here's something I do think is interesting, though. I'll give the book this. The phantom disappearing giant people are actually canon. They're illusions created by the positivity of the heart meant to tell Streetbeat where to go. Come to think of it, the illusory humans do tend to be placed in front of doors or collectibles, so this does square pretty well with what we know and it's information that we didn't have before. But you know why people don't normally pick up on that? It's because there's so much noise on the screen at any given time that you can't tell a waypoint from a dancing furry. So we fight Bartholomew, Hooverton, Wormsworth, Fortstaffer IV, Inkabel, Angelica, Werville Wright, Hydrak, Cuckoo, Princess Mary, Perla, and the Grim Creeper. Aren't you so glad you know their names? They all get defeated in like 2 pages. They all recount their tragic backstory. They all say they don't want to help Streetbeat fight Lance for whatever reason. And here's my favorite part about all of this. The book made me realize how good the game's cutscenes are. I mentioned before with Jose Gallard / Scarecrow / Bartholomew, these cutscenes are actually way more subtle and effective than the overdramatic monologues each person gives after they've been defeated. I was something of a prodigy when I was younger. For over a decade, I was the reigning champion. They said I was untouchable. I was the best at chess, and then I found a wonderful wife to marry. Everything was perfect. So perfect I didn't even realize it at the time. Then one day, this kid turned up, and suddenly my hold on the title of champion wasn't as secure as it had been. He was pulling it right out from under me. Maybe my confidence was shaken. Maybe I wasn't as sharp as I had been. Either way, I couldn't seem to win. I lost and sank into a deep despair. But I wallowed so much in my own self-pity that I never even noticed the sickness quietly ravaging my wife's body until it was too late. I lost the love of my life because I couldn't see anything beyond my own selfish desire to be the chess champion again. Wow, you're so right, Reddit. This simple moral tale about not being too high and mighty sucks. If only the game had Cass Milligan sit us down and explain that his obsession with chess made him ignore his dying wife. Even more obtuse cutscenes aren't helped by their novel counterparts. It's not that hard to understand that the dolphin isn't literally evil and that the animation is filtered through Fiona Demetria's perception of the accident. But people get distracted because the dolphin with red eyes looks stupid. This would not fix the game, change our understanding of the sequence, or really add anything at all. With that over, Street Beat fights Lance for a bit, and then right when all seems lost, our heroes come together and fight him a bunch more, taking turns explaining their motivations 12 times, and then Lance is finally defeated with the power of friendship. Everyone tearfully says goodbye, leaves the theater, and then Balan and the Spectre of Lance have a pages-long argument, all in rhyme, where Lance explains that thing I was telling you about how he was Balan 3,000 years ago, and it's just a matter of time before this Balan becomes the next Lance, which is interesting, I guess. It's fun, cool, great. And then Act 4 is just each cutscene after the boss fight, but with more stupid dialogue. It took me about a year to find Checkered King after I left Wonderworld, said Cass. Can you believe he's a celebrity? I couldn't tell you the first thing about chess, so I had no idea he was an undefeated world champion. Was, yes, but I lost my title, my wife, everything. I wish you hadn't been there to see me at my lowest. You ought to have told me to pull myself together. I didn't need to because I knew you would. But hey, something smells divine. What treat have you got in store for us today? I never knew you liked to cook. Cal smiled at Attilio. Almost about as much as I like chess. It makes me so happy to entertain friends with good food and drink. But I'm afraid the cheese I ordered for our appetizer hasn't arrived yet. What kind of cheese is it? Imported from the south. The climax was 50 pages ago. Wow, it's come quite the distance. Slowly over time, they all start to meet back up. There are some contrivances because people came to the theater in different years. And then Pensive Pierrot, one of our tritagonists in Act 1, learns that the young woman he'd loved so much in his dramatic backstory is actually the little girl, Clock Tower Kid, whom he knew in Wonderworld as a 10-year-old child. So it's like he's been waiting for her to grow up all this time. Yay! Just what we needed. Part 2. Is it good? No. Part 2.5. Could it have been good? Yes. There are two big problems with Balan Wonderworld Maestro of Mysteries Theater of Wonders. Other than the title, I guess, because I hate it. In order of severity, 1, the prose is terrible. 2, the structure of the book is terrible. And there are 2 respective excuses, reasons, risk vectors, whatever you want to call it, that are most easily attributable to them. They both actually happen to be acts of translation. 1 in language from Japanese, and 2 in format from a video game. Translation 1, from Japanese. So this book actually does have a translator, which I had to find out by stalking Goodreads reviews, and I still don't believe it because I cannot believe that a human being translated this. For a long time, he danced. He wanted to move like no one had before, to accomplish acrobatic feats no one else could. Beautiful downtown was his stage. A plethora of stores took up the first floors of the 4-story brick buildings, but there wasn't even so much as a window shopper in sight. Forget whether or not the book actually complements the game. I can't recommend the book as literature because the experience of reading it is just so dry. I don't have anything smart to say about this even. I know it's incredibly difficult to translate Japanese to English. I get that there's probably insane deadlines and horrible working conditions, or maybe the prose is just as terrible in the original Japanese, and the company specifically asked for a more literal translation, but come on, like, they waited as he realized the others hadn't come out after him, as he called out for his friends in a panic. Then they waited no longer. That's your closing line for the whole book? You didn't have to write like this. And then it's little things like the stupid names for the bosses, the stupid nicknames the characters get in Wonderworld, the fact that once we learn their real names, we just have it hyphenated with the Wonderworld nickname. Balan and Lance also both talk in rhyme, as I've mentioned before, and then at the end, they argue still in rhyme, which would already be the most annoying thing in the world, but the meter is also terrible. Masquerading as Wonderworld's maestro was quite ill-advised. I hope I can take this to mean you've been properly chastised. It was no masquerade, not in the sense you imply, but I suppose yes, by omission I did lie. To call myself maestro I indeed have cause, not of Wonderworld now, but Wonderworld that was. Oh? I was the one who kept positive and negative powers in harmony. Before I was called Lance, my name was Balan, you see. No. Denying it won't make it any less true, but now I have a question for you. Have you any memory of the real world you can recall? 3,000 years it's been, after all. No, why? Before you became Balan, it was my part to play, but I grew too close to the humans, and to their sorrow and sadness fell prey. Balan no longer, but Lance I became, and negativity began laying upon Wonderworld its claim. To save, there was only one thing I could do, and that was to create a new Balan, you. But maybe with this stuff I'm being too harsh, you might say. This is a light novel intended for children. Younger audiences tend to love silly rhymes and funny names. But come on, just please give me this one. If it was impossible for adults to like media intended for children, we wouldn't have book talk. Translation 2 from a video game. Forget phrasing, grammar, syntax, all that boring English 101 stuff. Let's talk about the act of distilling a game's core loop into the events of a novel. Arguably a greater act of translation than language itself. It is going to be very tempting to say that conventional literature does not have a gameplay loop, but this isn't really true. If you zoom in on the Freytag pyramid, the line is actually made up of loops. Brando Sando calls these try-fail cycles. I don't know if he made up that term, but that's where I heard it first, and I think that's the best way to put it. The key difference between a gameplay loop and a try-fail cycle is pretty straightforward. It's the source of the variables that create plot. The success of a gameplay loop is determined by the player's circumstances in action. The same set of circumstances, say getting attacked by Nagati, will play out differently if the player is engaged in the game, bored, has bad luck, is learning new mechanics, or is just putting the controller down to take a drink. The success of a try-fail cycle in literature, meanwhile, is the convincing synthesis of those same variables into the diegesis of the story. Executed well, there won't be any felt redundancy between two scenes, one where a character is attacked while alert, the other where a character is attacked while not alert, even though the core action of being attacked is the same. Look, all of this is just to say, the fact that this book sucks is not a symptom of video game concepts not translating into a book. 1, these concepts are completely analogous to each other. 2, even if they weren't, the book's events are boring, and they would be either way because they're an unbroken string of events that all end the exact same way. Which conveniently brings me back to the giant book-breaking structural issues I was alluding to earlier. Because we have to meet 12 different characters, we need to go to 12 different locations twice, and then fight 12 different monsters, all with stupid names, hear 12 different backstories, see 12 different resolutions. That's like 60 different situations where we're doing or describing the exact same thing. As a video game, this would be just as bad. If anything, maybe Act 1 would have been improved by being in the game, not vice versa. I'm not saying that the game would have needed it, but some people like walking sims. Maybe the redundancy could be swept under the rug by good pros, but we don't have that, so... Obviously, the right answer is don't have 12 major characters in a book of this size. But since we can't get around that, imagine if maybe we had 1 or 2, a handful even, of the boss fights in Act 3, where they get described in detail, maybe the first couple and then the last one, and then the rest were explained in a couple-page montage. Maybe in Act 1, where they're meeting each individual person and having the exact same conversation, they could send one of the less important characters like Skygazer, who remembers Skygazer, to go get the others off screen, and then we do our less important meet and greets at the very final meeting where Lance comes in and does the whole twist thing. It would still need a lot of editing to not feel wooden, but at least this wouldn't be the same thing every time. And this isn't even an off-the-wall, non-standard suggestion either. Kind of baby's first editing note. So why did no one address this, and why am I the only person on the internet pointing this out? Not a good book. But if Kawasaki and Osani both had more freedom, maybe they could have taken these factors and used these video game concepts to their advantage and written it in a way that wasn't horrible. Would that have changed anything about the Balan Wonderworld disaster? No, but it wouldn't have been as terrible to read. Part 3. Why does this matter? I think seeing people on the internet extolling the virtues of this awful book is hitting that same nerve that started the English Club podcast in the first place. It was the most annoying nails on a chalkboard thing to hear in a critique group. You call out something, anything needing improvement, and they'll say, oh no, this makes total sense in chapter 2, or in book 2, I actually explained this character's entire backstory. Like, even let's give the benefit of the doubt here and say that chapter 2, book 2 exists. None of that changes the fact that what I am consuming is terrible. Balan Wonderworld story is not and cannot be redeemed by being put into words. We are not missing out on any cool ideas if only there were more dialogue and proper nouns. Balan Wonderworld is bad because it sucks. The novel sucks too, but even if it didn't, that wouldn't change anything. I mean, I don't know, I'm just getting Buster Baxter pilled. A controversy breaks out, this narrative worms its way into the conversation, and then it's just accepted as fact because no one verifies anything. Which I guess is a takeaway, even if it's baby's first encounter with propaganda. You know, it's actually just like that part in Balan Wonderworld, Maestro of Mystery, Theater of Wonders, where Lance convinces all 12 of our main characters that Balan is evil, even though he's the one who's actually trying to save them, and then...
Why don't my friends talk to me? Have I done something wrong? Pathetic. I just want things to be